A simple woman humiliated at the court, only to shock them all as the new judge. Catherine Sullivan stood confident, despite their mockery. Judge Montgomery laughed with the courtroom at her casual clothes and direct questions. Little did they know, her gray sweatshirt concealed the woman who would soon wear their robes. Catherine Sullivan carefully selected her attire that morning. A plain gray sweatshirt over a black t-shirt, worn jeans, and comfortable shoes. At 45, she'd spent 2 decades climbing through the legal system, from public defender to respected district judge. Today's mission, however, required leaving her tailored suits and judicial demeanor at home. She studied her reflection, tucking a strand of brown hair behind her ear. The woman staring back looked nothing like the formal headshot attached to her recent appointment letter. That had been precisely the point. 1 week, she murmured, straightening her sweatshirt. 1 week before she'd officially take the bench at the county courthouse, replacing the retiring Judge Montgomery. The courthouse with the highest number of complaints about dismissive treatment of ordinary citizens. The courthouse where defendants without expensive lawyers reportedly received noticeably harsher sentences. Catherine had built her career on fairness and accountability. When the Chief Justice had approached her about this position, she'd accepted on one condition. She needed to observe the court dynamics herself before taking over. "You want to do what?" Chief Justice Abrams had asked, eyebrows raised. "I need to see how that courtroom operates when they don't know who's watching," Catherine had explained. "No special treatment, no performances. I want to see how regular people are treated." Abrams had eventually agreed, though reluctantly. "Your official introduction to the staff is scheduled for next Monday. Until then, you're on your own." Now, Catherine checked her watch. The Richardson case was scheduled for 10 a.m., a straightforward hearing that had somehow spiraled into 3 years of procedural delays. The case file showed a pattern of postponements whenever the defendant's court-appointed lawyer requested additional time, while the opposing counsel from Carson and Mitchell sailed through with immediate accommodations. She grabbed her worn leather bag, slipping in her credentials and appointment letter just in case. Not that she planned to reveal herself today. This was strictly reconnaissance. Catherine drove to the courthouse, purposely parking in the public lot rather than the reserved judicial spaces. As she walked through the main entrance, she blended perfectly with the crowd of citizens, concerned family members, witnesses, defendants, and spectators. No one gave her a second glance as she passed through security. Following the posted signs, she made her way to courtroom 3. The polished wooden doors loomed ahead, intimidating by design. Catherine had seen it countless times, how the very architecture of justice could silence those it was meant to serve. She entered quietly, taking a seat in the back row of the gallery. The courtroom was already filling with lawyers in crisp suits, clerks shuffling papers, and the court reporter setting up. The Richardson family sat huddled together, mother, father, and their daughter Emma, whose college fund had vanished in what they claimed was financial advisor malpractice. Catherine observed how the bailiff chatted amicably with the defense attorney while barely acknowledging the Richardsons. She noted how the court clerk rolled her eyes when Emma timidly approached, asking where their appointed lawyer might be. "He'll get here when he gets here," the clerk said dismissively. "Take your seat." The atmosphere shifted as side doors opened and Judge Montgomery entered in his flowing black robes. In his 60s, with silver hair and an imposing presence built over 30 years on the bench, he commanded immediate respect. "All rise," called the bailiff. As Catherine stood with everyone else, she steeled herself. Today, she wasn't Judge Sullivan. Today, she was just another observer in a system that too often forgot who it was meant to serve. The proceedings began with the usual formalities. Judge Montgomery called the Richardson case with practiced indifference, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Catherine noticed how he specifically acknowledged the defense counsel by name, while referring to the plaintiff simply as the other party. When the Richardsons' court-appointed attorney finally arrived, 10 minutes late and breathlessly apologizing, Montgomery's disapproval was palpable. "Mr. Davis, once again, you demonstrate your disregard for this court's schedule," he remarked dryly, eliciting chuckles from the regular courthouse staff. Catherine watched as Emma Richardson shrank in her seat, her parents exchanging worried glances. This was their financial future at stake, yet the proceedings carried on as if their presence was merely incidental. 20 minutes into the hearing, Catherine found herself growing increasingly frustrated. The defense attorney had been granted his third extension for document discovery, while the judge had summarily dismissed Mr. Davis's request for the same consideration. Without fully intending to, Catherine found herself on her feet. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and steady. The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to her, the unknown woman in a gray sweatshirt interrupting court proceedings. Judge Montgomery looked up, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Ma'am, this is not a town hall meeting. Please be seated or leave my courtroom." Catherine stood her ground. "I apologize, Your Honor, but there seems to be an inconsistency in how procedural requests are being handled. If the defense is granted additional time for discovery, shouldn't the plaintiffs be afforded the same opportunity?" The defense attorney turned to stare at her, affronted. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The Richardsons looked both startled and hopeful at this unexpected intervention. Judge Montgomery's face flushed slightly. "And you are?" "A concerned observer," Catherine replied evenly. "Well, concerned observer," Montgomery said, sarcasm dripping from every word. "When you pass the bar and practice law for 30 years, your opinion on courtroom procedure might carry some weight. Until then, you will sit down or I will have you removed." Several attorneys chuckled. The bailiff took a step toward Catherine. She remained composed, even as embarrassment threatened to color her cheeks. This wasn't about her pride. She needed to see how this played out, how far Montgomery would go when challenged by someone he deemed beneath him. "I understand," she said, taking her seat again. "Thank you for the clarification, Your Honor." But Judge Montgomery wasn't finished with her yet. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he studied the woman who had dared to question his courtroom. "Actually," Judge Montgomery said, removing his glasses and setting them deliberately on the bench, "since our visitor is so concerned with the proceedings, perhaps she would care to enlighten us further." Catherine remained seated, aware of every eye in the courtroom now fixed on her. "You," Montgomery pointed directly at her, "approach the bench." A hush fell over the courtroom. The court reporter paused, fingers hovering over her stenotype. The Richardsons watched with wide eyes as Catherine rose from her seat and walked calmly to stand before the judge's bench. Up close, Montgomery's contempt was even more apparent. He looked down at her from his elevated position, taking in her casual attire with a dismissive glance. "Your name for the record?" he demanded. "Catherine Sullivan," she answered truthfully. "And what exactly is your interest in these proceedings, Miss Sullivan? Are you a friend of the plaintiffs? A relative, perhaps?" "I'm an observer with an interest in judicial procedure," Catherine replied. Montgomery's eyebrows shot up. "An observer? With an interest in judicial procedure?" he repeated, his tone making it clear how ridiculous he found her statement. "And where did you receive your legal education, Miss Sullivan?" She could have answered truthfully. "Yale Law, class of 2003, with honors." Instead, she simply said, "I've studied the law, Your Honor." This elicited the reaction she expected. Montgomery leaned back in his chair and laughed, a sound quickly joined by chuckles from the attorneys and court staff familiar with his moods. The defense attorney smirked openly, while even the Richardsons' lawyer looked embarrassed for her. "You've studied the law," Montgomery repeated, making air quotes with his fingers. "How illuminating. And based on this study, you feel qualified to interrupt my courtroom and question my decisions." Catherine maintained her composure. "I was merely noting what appeared to be an inconsistency in procedure." What appears inconsistent to the untrained eye often has sound legal basis, Montgomery countered, "something you would understand if you had any actual legal expertise." He gestured broadly to the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a legal scholar in our midst today. Perhaps we should all defer to Ms. Sullivan's expertise." More laughter rippled through the gallery. Catherine noticed a few uncomfortable faces among the spectators, people who recognized the public humiliation for what it was, but were powerless to intervene. "Tell me, Miss Sullivan," Montgomery continued, clearly enjoying himself now, "in your studied opinion, how should I rule on the matter before us? It was a trap, of course. Answer, and she'd be overstepping further. Refuse, and she'd confirm his assertion that she had no place speaking up." "I wouldn't presume to tell you how to rule, Your Honor," she replied carefully. "I was simply advocating for consistent application of procedural allowances." "Advocating?" Montgomery's voice rose slightly. "You have no standing to advocate for anything in my courtroom. This isn't a social media forum where anyone with an opinion gets to chime in." He leaned forward, his expression hardening. "This is a court of law, Miss Sullivan. It operates according to rules and protocols established over centuries. It requires years of education and experience to navigate properly. Your sweater and good intentions don't qualify you to question how I run these proceedings." The defense attorney nodded approvingly. Even the bailiff was smirking now. "Perhaps next time you feel the urge to offer legal commentary," Montgomery continued, "you might consider appropriate attire and credentials. At minimum, a basic understanding of courtroom etiquette." He waved his hand dismissively. "You may return to your seat. If you disrupt these proceedings again, you will be removed. Is that clear?" "Perfectly clear, Your Honor," Catherine replied, her voice steady despite the public dressing down. As she turned to walk back to her seat, she caught Emma Richardson's eye. The young woman looked defeated, as if Catherine's humiliation had confirmed what she already suspected, that justice here was not designed for people like them. Catherine had seen enough, but she wasn't done yet. Catherine returned to her seat, dignity intact despite the public mockery. The courtroom gradually returned to business, but something had changed. Curious glances were cast her way. A few courthouse regulars whispered among themselves. The proceedings continued with Montgomery ruling predictably in favor of the defense's motion while denying the Richardsons' request. Catherine made notes in a small notebook she'd pulled from her bag, documenting times, statements, and rulings. During a brief recess, she noticed a court clerk studying her with unusual intensity. The woman, whose nameplate read Martha Jenkins, tilted her head slightly, as if trying to place Catherine's face. Catherine kept her expression neutral, but she recognized the first signs of recognition. Martha had likely seen the appointment announcement in the judicial newsletter. The defense attorney approached the bench during the recess, engaging in a friendly, hushed conversation with Montgomery. Their easy familiarity, complete with shared laughter while glancing toward the Richardsons, only confirmed what Catherine had suspected from the case files. When court resumed, Montgomery seemed distracted, occasionally glancing in Catherine's direction. His earlier confidence had diminished slightly. Perhaps Martha had whispered something to him, Or maybe her calm reaction to his mockery had planted seeds of doubt. "Your Honor," the defense attorney spoke smoothly. "Given today's developments, we'd like to propose a settlement conference rather than continuing these proceedings." Montgomery nodded approvingly. "A reasonable suggestion, Counselor. The court would welcome resolution without further delays." Catherine watched as the Richardsons conferred with their attorney, who seemed eager to accept any offer. Emma Richardson appeared close to tears, as if suddenly remembering Catherine's presence. Montgomery addressed the courtroom. "I'll remind all observers that settlement discussions are confidential, and any attempt to interfere will result in removal and possible contempt charges." His eyes locked with Catherine's, the warning unmistakable. When the attorneys disappeared into the conference room, Catherine slipped out of the courtroom. She checked her watch. Nearly noon. In the hallway, she spotted Chief Justice Abrams walking toward Courtroom 3, accompanied by a court administrator carrying a leather portfolio. Catherine quickened her pace toward the ladies' room. She needed a moment to decide how to proceed. Her reconnaissance had yielded exactly what she'd suspected. Preferential treatment, intimidation of ordinary citizens, and a clear pattern of bias. The bathroom door swung open behind her as she stood at the sink. "Judge Sullivan!" Martha Jenkins stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning recognition. "It is you, isn't it? I saw your appointment announcement, but I didn't realize. Why are you dressed like that? And why did Judge Montgomery?" Catherine turned slowly, her finger to her lips. "It's complicated, Martha," she said quietly, "and about to become much more so." Catherine reapplied her lipstick with deliberate calm, watching Martha's reflection in the mirror. "This isn't exactly how I planned today to go," she admitted, capping the lipstick. Martha looked nervously toward the door. "Judge Montgomery, he humiliated you in front of everyone. If he knew who you were—" "But he doesn't," Catherine replied, turning to face the clerk directly. "At least, not yet. And I'd appreciate your discretion for just a little longer." Martha hesitated. "The Chief Justice is here. They're gathering in Courtroom 3 for some announcement." Her eyes widened in sudden understanding. "It's about you, isn't it? Your official introduction?" Catherine nodded. "Moved up from next week, apparently. The Chief Justice was concerned about my unconventional approach." "I should go," Martha said anxiously. "They'll notice I'm missing." "Of course," Catherine agreed. "Would you mind giving me a moment, though?" "I'd prefer to make my entrance after everyone's assembled." After Martha left, Catherine took a deep breath, straightening her sweatshirt. This wasn't how she'd envisioned her first day at the courthouse, but perhaps it was better this way. She'd witnessed firsthand what needed changing. Meanwhile, in Courtroom 3, confusion reigned. The Richardsons and their attorney had returned from the settlement room looking dejected. The defense team wore satisfied smiles, and Judge Montgomery was speaking with Chief Justice Abrams, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "What do you mean? Introduce her today," Montgomery hissed. "I haven't even met her yet." The Chief Justice, a formidable woman in her 60s, regarded Montgomery coolly. "She's been quite eager to observe your courtroom procedures, Richard. I believe you've already made quite an impression." Montgomery's face paled slightly. "What are you talking about, Eleanor?" Before she could answer, the courtroom doors opened. Catherine Sullivan walked in, still dressed in her gray sweatshirt and jeans, but now carrying herself with unmistakable authority. The courtroom fell silent. Montgomery stared, recognizing the woman he'd publicly humiliated just an hour earlier. The blood drained from his face as realization dawned. "No," he whispered. Catherine approached the bench, nodding respectfully to Chief Justice Abrams before turning to face the gallery. "For those who don't know me," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I'm Catherine Sullivan. As of next Monday, I'll be taking over as presiding judge of this court, following Judge Montgomery's retirement." Gasps and murmurs erupted throughout the courtroom. The defense attorney's smug expression vanished. The Richardsons looked confused, then amazed. "I want to thank Judge Montgomery for the illuminating demonstration of his courtroom procedures today," Catherine continued, meeting his gaze directly. "It's been most educational." Montgomery's jaw worked silently. His earlier confidence evaporated. Chief Justice Abrams stepped forward. Judge Sullivan requested an opportunity to observe court proceedings before her official start date. Though her methods were, she paused, giving Catherine a pointed look, unconventional. Her dedication to understanding this court's dynamics is commendable. The court administrator opened the leather portfolio, removing official documents bearing the state's Supreme Court seal. "I had planned to do this more formally next week," the Chief Justice continued, "but since we're all here, Richard Montgomery, after 30 years of service, we formally acknowledge your retirement effective this Friday." She turned to Catherine. "Catherine Sullivan, the governor has confirmed your appointment to this bench with full duties and responsibilities to commence Monday morning." Catherine accepted the documents with a solemn nod. "I look forward to serving this community with fairness and respect," she said, her eyes sweeping the courtroom before landing on the Richardsons. "Every person who enters this courtroom deserves to be heard with dignity, regardless of status or representation." For the first time that day, Emma Richardson smiled. The courtroom remained stunned into silence. Judge Montgomery stood stiffly beside the bench, his authority visibly diminished. Court staff watched wide-eyed as the power dynamic they'd known for years inverted before them. "In light of today's unique circumstances," Chief Justice Abrams said, breaking the tension, "I suggest we adjourn the current proceedings until next week." Montgomery finally found his voice. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I'm still presiding judge until Friday. I see no reason to disrupt the court calendar." Catherine, standing her ground in her casual attire, addressed the Richardsons directly. "Would your family be amenable to a brief postponement, with assurance that your case will receive full and fair consideration next week?" Mr. Richardson looked from Montgomery to Catherine, then at his daughter Emma. "Yes, Your Honor, we would." The defense attorney immediately objected. "Your Honor, Chief Justice, this is highly irregular. We were on the verge of a settlement." "A settlement negotiated under duress and imbalanced representation is hardly justice," Catherine interjected calmly. Montgomery's face flushed. "I have never presided over an unfair proceeding in my 30 years on this bench." The courtroom held its breath at this direct confrontation. Chief Justice Abrams raised her hand. "This isn't the time or place for such discussions. Court is adjourned until Monday morning, when Judge Sullivan will officially preside." As people began gathering their belongings, Catherine approached the Richardsons quietly. "I'd like to assure you that your case will receive proper consideration," she told them. "Equal time, equal weight to your concerns." Emma Richardson's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. We've been fighting for so long and nobody seemed to listen." Catherine nodded. "That will change." Across the room, Martha Jenkins was already removing Montgomery's nameplate from the bench. Other staff members averted their eyes as the retiring judge stalked toward his chambers, his scheduled farewell reception suddenly awkward under the circumstances. The defense attorney approached Catherine cautiously. "Judge Sullivan, I hope you understand that I was simply representing my client's interests vigorously. Catherine met his gaze evenly. "Of course, Counselor, and I expect you'll continue to do so within the bounds of equitable procedure and professional courtesy to all parties." His smile faltered. "Certainly, Your Honor." As the courtroom cleared, Chief Justice Abrams touched Catherine's arm lightly. "This wasn't exactly what I had in mind when I agreed to your observation request." Catherine smiled slightly. "I know, but it was necessary." "You've made quite an entrance," Abrams noted dryly. "Montgomery won't forgive this humiliation easily." "This wasn't about humiliating him," Catherine replied. "It was about seeing the truth of how justice is administered here." Abrams studied her thoughtfully. "Well, Judge Sullivan, it appears you have your work cut out for you." Catherine looked around the courtroom, her courtroom, come Monday morning. "Yes," she agreed, "I certainly do." Monday morning arrived, bright and clear. Catherine Sullivan stood before the mirror, straightening her black judicial robe. The weight of responsibility settled comfortably on her shoulders. The weekend news had covered the unusual courtroom revelation, with legal blogs speculating about the implications of her unorthodox introduction. The judicial community was abuzz with the story, some criticizing her methods, others applauding her commitment to transparency. As she entered the courthouse, Catherine noticed the difference immediately. Gone was the invisibility of Friday's visit. Court officers nodded respectfully. Attorneys paused their conversations to greet her. Even the security guard stood a little straighter. She paused at the doorway to courtroom 3, taking a moment to compose herself. Her name now adorned the judge's entrance. Inside, the room was packed. The Richardson family sat in the front row, looking hopeful. The defense attorney stood conversing with colleagues, his manner more subdued than before. Martha Jenkins approached, offering a thick folder. "Your first day's docket, Judge Sullivan. And these came for you." She gestured toward the bench, where a modest arrangement of flowers sat, with a card from the courthouse staff. "Thank you, Martha." At precisely 9 a.m., Catherine entered her courtroom. "All rise," called the bailiff. The room stood as one. Catherine took her place at the bench, surveying the faces before her. Attorneys, defendants, plaintiffs, families, observers. Each one deserving of respect and fair consideration. "Please be seated," she said. "Before we begin today's proceedings, I want to establish my expectations for this court." She leaned forward slightly. "In this courtroom, everyone will be heard. Everyone will be treated with dignity. Justice requires nothing less." She opened the first case file. "Richardson versus Carson Financial Advisors," she announced. "Both parties ready?" And with that, a new chapter of justice began. If this story touched your heart today, remember that true dignity comes not from titles or positions, but from how we treat others, especially those with less power than ourselves. Have you ever witnessed someone being unfairly judged by their appearance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe if you believe in stories that remind us to look beyond the surface and treat everyone with respect. From which city are you watching this video? Let us know. Your support helps us continue bringing these meaningful stories that remind us what really matters in life.